Are you tired of feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, and sick to your stomach trying to maintain pre pregnancy responsibilities, grow a baby, and be the best version of yourself for everyone else? If you desire a stress free birth and postpartum healing that physically prepares your mind, body, and soul for parenthood without the fear, confusion, and isolation that comes with unsolicited advice from both medical professionals and loved ones, then mama, you can turn fear into joy, confusion into confidence, and isolation into connection without feeling guilty, selfish, or inconsiderate. And I'm going to show you how. Welcome to Nurture Your Pregnancy Journey podcast. I'm your host, Troi Lauren, creative mother of two, birth coach, and traditional postpartum healer. On this podcast, you will learn the effects that stress has on your pregnancy journey and practical tips that will help you seamlessly insert self-care into your daily life from professional parents just like you who desire to put the control back into the hands of mothers for a positive pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience. So whether you're a first-time mom or a mother of many, I am here to support you as you only do the things that bring you joy. Let's go. Peace, beautiful souls. My name is Troi Lauren of Mama Tree Doula. I'm excited to bring you one of my favorite people that I've ever learned from throughout my career in birth work. I forgot to tell you that I'm your favorite full spectrum wellness doula, right? And she is a part of the reason why I consider myself that. I want to welcome you all I want to welcome Brittany Sharpe McCollum to Nurture Your Pregnancy Journey. Everybody say, hey, Brittany. Hi, Brittany. Tell us about yourself a little bit.
So, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. And I'm always so excited to talk about birth, and particularly when it's geared towards people that are pregnant, because I feel like there's so much misinformation out there and so much fear. And we just need to start breaking that down to just help people be more confident, no matter how they're going to give birth, but feeling more confident and more prepared going into it. So, that's at the heart of what I do, is to provide people with evidence-based education and usable information so that they can go into their birth experience feeling prepared, feeling confident, feeling knowledgeable, having the skills to communicate effectively with providers, and then therefore hopefully coming out of their births feeling like they did something amazing as opposed to feeling like something happened to them. So I do all of that within the realm of childbirth education, and doula work as well, and then a little bit of lactation support also. But really, I mostly do childbirth education for expecting parents, and then I also create and facilitate continuing education workshops for providers. So obstetricians, midwives, doulas, nurses, childbirth educators. So it's really cool being able to work kind of on both sides of things. I've been doing this work for 16 years. I work primarily out of the greater Philadelphia area, but I also do things all over the country. I, again, teach workshops all over, and then do a whole lot of virtual stuff as well. So my goal really is to change what maternity care looks like from kind of approaching things from both sides, from working with providers in terms of understanding physiological birth, as well as the role that movement plays in decreasing intervention during labor and birth, and then also work with parents to help them feel a lot more informed and again break down a lot of those myths and ideas out there that really are detrimental to our confidence in giving birth and kind of make us feel more fearful as opposed to more excited for our
Mm,
experiences.
Now, what brought you into that? I know today we're going to talk about movement in labor and throughout.
Yeah.
What got you
So,
into this work?
so my oldest is about to be 17, and it was his birth that really pushed me into doing this work. I felt very confident and excited about going into labor. I did not feel fearful, but I did not realize the disconnect between what my expectations were and what my provider's expectations were. I assumed that everyone looked at birth as a normal process.
Mhm.
And so I was very, very caught off guard towards the end of my pregnancy when I started asking questions and realizing that I was not happy with the answers that I was getting. So I went into my birth feeling really anxious and nervous, not because of the birth process itself, but because I was starting to realize like, oh wow, like this, I'm not prepared for the advocacy piece of it. I'm not prepared to to know how to communicate what I want to my providers and make it happen. So I went into it feeling like that, and then came out of it feeling like the same way, like, oh wow, I was not listened to. My providers didn't offer me very much at all to help guide the process, and I just kind of felt like it's got to be better than this. So I started doing a lot of research and just like reading everything I could about birth. I think in part, I mean, I know in part to heal from my own process, but the more I read, the more I was like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating and also so important.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time my son was a year, I had certified as an educator, and was in the process of certifying as a doula as well. And
Mm-hmm.
now he's going to be 17 next month. So
Oh, that's
crazy.
awesome. I love how our own personal stories bring us to our passions and our purpose in life. It's
Yeah.
so important. We learn the lessons, they become compound contributing factors to society.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Beautiful.
And it's funny, like I have four kids total, and the next three I had like really great experiences with their births, and I always feel bad saying like my all my kids know about my experiences with their births, but I always feel like I don't want my first son to feel like, like his birth wasn't good. It's not that that wasn't it. It was a huge push into this work for me. I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't have that experience that I did. So
Mm-hmm.
there's tremendous value in it, which I always try to incorporate when I talk about his birth, but also like it was a big eye opener for me, and in terms of gosh, like the disconnect again between like what people think birth is going to look like and then what it actually looks like. So
Yeah. Okay. So let's figure out or let's share with the people how movement during labor can contribute to a smoother and more comfortable birthing experience.
oh my
Oh,
gosh. So this is like I think movement is the missing piece of the puzzle when we're thinking about how the birth process unfolds. So I have to grab a pelvis because
please.
I always have pelvises around me. So here we have the pelvis, which is very misunderstood in terms of birth, not only by people that are pregnant, but also by most providers. There's no training at all in the movement of these bones. And so we don't really think of it as this important factor during the birth process. But it's huge because this is the bony structure that the baby is moving through. And
Mhm.
babies, they have to make all these twists and turns in order to work their way down and out. And this is just one example of how babies move through the pelvis. They could move this way. So they are actively involved in birth. But the thing is, if they're working hard to be born, they're literally wiggling their heads, moving around, responding to tension and laxity in the pelvic floor. But if the space around them is stagnant, what if
Mhm.
they get a little like kind of funky in there? What if their head's a little tilted to the side? What if they extend their head a little bit? What if they start to get wedged? If
Mhm.
they start to get wedged and we don't understand how to create space for them where they need it, then we wind up in a situation where babies get quote unquote stuck in the pelvis, which is a huge contributing factor to cesarean rates as well as
Mhm.
pitocin in
Mhm.
labor, which we know then can increase the likelihood of other interventions and or complications. So, when we understand how these bones shift and move based on how the person laboring is positioning themselves, it offers us an opportunity to work with the baby to help encourage descent and rotation.
Mhm.
And the thing, another like big myth that's out there, people think, well, you can only move if you don't have an epidural. Could not be further from the truth. If you have an epidural, there's still many different positions and movements that you can do that will create changes of space within those pelvic bones. And that's what we're aiming to do is understand how movement from the person laboring is going to affect space changes in the pelvis and then
Mhm.
use that information to prevent babies from getting wedged in the pelvis.
Okay, so how does that promote or play a role in promoting the progress of labor, like in different stages?
Yeah, good question. So if the baby's high up here,
Mhm.
so let's say babies, we call this the inlet of the pelvis, the baby's at the top here. And if we're creating space at the top where the baby needs it, if you can see this visual, hold on. We can see this visual here. If we create space where the baby needs it, then as the uterine contractions push the baby down, and we're not even talking about pushing yet, we're just talking about the first stage of labor, but the uterus is always working the baby down even as it's opening the cervix. So then the baby can take advantage of those incremental space changes
Mhm.
during the contractions. But
Mhm.
again, like if we're not creating space there, if we're in a position that actually minimizes space at the top of the pelvis, then the baby is less likely likely to be able to descend.
Mm.
And then as the baby continues to descend, sensation changes, or if somebody's having an internal exam, they can tell that the baby's moved lower. And then we know, all right, like we need to maybe start moving this part of the pelvis a little bit more. So we need to keep changing that space there. So as oh, my hair was stuck in the pelvis, as the uterine contractions work the baby down, then we're also creating that space so the baby can take advantage of that and keep moving down and out.
Oh, so I love that. I love how we understand as birthing professionals and so our OBs, the people who are around, but how can the mothers really feel a sense of control through movement and understanding like what's happening, how to feel, how can I gauge what needs space where, like, like how
Yeah.
the birthing people get to benefit from the knowledge that movement is really the catalyst for change.
Yeah, so there's a few different things to think about there. So there's the instinctive movement that happens in an unmedicated birth. When people feel at least somewhat calm going into their experience, they're going to move in a way that responds to where their baby needs that space without even, it's not a conscious thing. It's just a subconscious, like, this is uncomfortable here, so I'm going to shift my body like this. And usually, what helps you feel better during labor is also going to be really helpful for working the baby down and out. For
Mm.
example, before I go on to the next point, let me share an example. So if I was like laboring and I'm rocking side to side like this because it feels better during my contraction, what
Mhm.
I'm also doing then is shifting the space for the baby without even realizing it. It's totally instinctive. Another example would be, let me grab my birth ball here. If I'm really pregnant, like 40 weeks pregnant, I'm sitting on my birth ball. I'm sitting with my legs wide. I'm doing this because it's how I stay comfortable at the end of pregnancy. Same thing goes when my thighs are farther apart like this. I've actually created space at the top of the pelvis. And when I'm shifting, I'm giving my baby space at the end of pregnancy right where they need it. So
Mm.
it's super instinctive. But here's the thing, when we have the entire labor process unfolding at the same time, one of the things that's really key, and I'm sure you're going to touch on this with other people too, is that need to shut down the thinking brain. The thinking brain needs to be turned off in labor. So if we have somebody birthing unmedicated and they're thinking through every single movement that they're doing, it's actually not all that beneficial because they're using that thinking brain too much and there's not enough. Well, the thinking brain's going to overpower the primal
Mm.
part of the brain and create anxiety and potentially fear. So we also need support people, whether that's a doula, whether that's a partner, a mother, a family member, a friend, whoever. We need support people to also understand the importance of movement so that they can help guide that movement during labor. And then the other piece of it is if somebody gets an epidural, well, then they can't feel necessarily what they need to do in order to feel better and therefore also create progress. So, again, that's where the knowledge piece of it comes into play, whether it's a partner, family member, friend, somebody who can help guide and support movement when someone has an epidural, because then we've kind of lost that instinctive piece of it.
Mhm.
But we can modify all of the instinctive movements that we might be doing at certain points in labor for use with an epidural.
Mm.
So then the other, I think, like the piece that kind of pulls it all together is talking with providers about this. And many providers, even if they don't necessarily have continuing education on the changes of space in the pelvis that can be accomplished with positions, I think I've seen, at least in the time that I've been doing birth work, that many providers are much more aware of the need for movement, even if they don't fully understand it. So
Mhm.
I always tell people like that your provider's probably not going to be in the room with you all that much. You're not going to see them all that often. And if you don't advocate for what you want, they're probably not going to offer a whole lot. But if you let them know, hey, I want my epidural, but I also want to be moving around, or, I'm planning to have no epidural, so I'm going to be using the space around me, then most providers, in my experience as a doula, are like, okay, we can work with that. But if you don't say anything, if you just stay quiet about it, then a lot of times they walk in the room like, oh no, what's going on here? This isn't what we're ready for. So
Mhm.
yeah, so we have to be willing to advocate for it too, and just talk about it. And I think not only in the moment but prenatally, so that we get a sense of how supportive our providers are going to be and how much we may need to advocate during the labor process for all of that movement.
I love that. I'm always surprised at how often I go into hospitals and providers are like, "Wait, what's happening?"
Yeah.
Like, we're just moving safely. I love
Yeah.
to tell the people that I support that, like, if breathing becomes a manual thing in labor, we can believe that movement is also something that we need to start preparing for, that we might lose that instinctual sensation and feeling and understanding.
Mhm.
So being aware, and not only being aware, but practicing what it
Mhm.
looks and feels like, what feels yummy to your body, what feels good, what don't you like, what do you want to stay away from? Like those are really
Yes.
important pieces. But I love that you touched on partners and coaches and doulas and things like that. So can you share some examples of movement-based strategies that partners and doulas and support people, how they can assist mothers during labor?
Yeah, so a really big one that I emphasize in my birth classes so much is that movement should be happening during the contraction. And I think a lot of us kind of get that backwards. A lot of us are like, okay, the contraction's coming. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to get into my position and I'm going to stay there. And then when the contraction ends, then I'm going to relax and I'm going to move. No, the movement needs to happen during the contraction because remember, the uterus is squeezing around the baby as it's also pulling up on the sides of the cervix. So the baby needs those space changes while the contraction is happening because that's when the baby's being pushed into that new space. So one of the things that I emphasize with partners or support people, as well as with the person that's laboring, is make sure rhythmic movement is encouraged during the contraction. So
Mhm,
when the contraction's building, we take a few deep breaths, we start rocking side to side, and we do that movement during the contraction, and then we rest in between.
mhm,
And for support people, I remind them as well that we're not only providing that support during the contraction. In fact, I think it may be even more important to provide the support in between because the time in between contractions is when somebody is kind of, like regrouping, preparing for that next one, relaxing their body, letting go of any tension, taking some deep grounding breaths, rolling their shoulders back. And so, if support people forget the need to provide encouragement for relaxation in between, then that person might be there kind of hunched up and like stressed out waiting for the next
mhm,
contraction, and that's only going to create further loss of energy and motivation and also just exhaustion. So
mhm,
big tip that I think is really important is the person laboring should be rocking their body during the contractions and resting in between. And partners or support people can help to guide that by just gentle, like shoulder rubs in between contractions or during the contraction, hands on the hips, encouraging them to rock side to side. And again, even with an epidural, movement is something that can be encouraged, especially with the use of props like peanut balls, can be encouraged by partners or support people.
mhm.
So yeah, that's a really important thing I think is that movement during the contraction. It can be a total game changer in my experience.
I think I had two births, all natural, non-medicated. And
Hmm.
for the first one, I labored throughout the night and I didn't want to like mess with anybody. My doula was over there resting. My mom was by the bed. My co-parent was somewhere and I was in bed and I was like, you're doing good. It's just a contraction. Just keep breathing. I don't even know what's going like, well,
Hmm.
just keep breathing. It'll go away. Okay, it's a little
Hmm.
bit more pain than I thought, but it's fine. So that first experience, I spent like a lot of the time moving. We were dancing, we were singing. So much fun was being had. But overnight, I was like, I gotta rest and everybody else has to rest. So just be quiet and don't move through each contraction. So it was so important. I realized throughout my second one that like that's not how life is supposed to be. And I actually labored, I labored on the side of the bed all night on the birth ball. So it was like significantly different. Still 30 hours between the two, but the experience itself was like engaging and interactive. So
I love
I
that.
can attest to movement. I speak from a very personal experience on how and why movement is important during the contractions and not in between, but also that like relaxing and cleansing breath to allow our bodies to ground and reset and prepare for the next one.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
I love that you just said that you had two unmedicated births and the experience itself was so different because I think, the thing is like, yeah, the body you're going to give birth. Like but the idea is to give birth and come out of it feeling like, wow, that was incredible as opposed to feeling like what the hell just happened to me.
yep.
So you can have like an unmedicated birth and you can manage your contractions and power through and all this, but can we do it in a way that also feels really good that helps us to feel
Mhm,
like we're in control and staying on top of things? Like that's the big difference with having those skills up front.
mhm,
It's not that we can't give birth without those skills. We absolutely can. People have been giving birth for thousands of years, but can we do it in a way that's really good for the body and also really
mhm,
good for the mind and the soul? Like that's the
mhm.
that's the goal.
That's important. All right. So, what advice do you have for mothers who might be anxious about the pain associated with labor
Mhm.
and how movement can alleviate it?
Yeah, so going back to that rhythmic movement, that rocking, so that's a
Mhm.
really important piece of managing the discomfort of labor. I don't like to tell people that labor is pain free. I think, first of all, everyone experiences labor in such a different way, and pain has so many different facets to it that who am I to tell somebody, like, you should have a pain free labor? No, I mean, I gotta say, like, my labors were not pain free. Did I feel like I was able to manage them and stay in control? Yes, for the most part. But it's not, I don't think the goal is like pain free or short birth. The goal is, again, feeling like you're on top of what's happening. And so recognizing that discomfort is actually a really important piece of labor, whether we call it pain or discomfort or challenge, however we want to call it, it's not easy,
Mm,
and that's what makes our bodies move. The discomfort forces you to figure out what's going to make you feel better, and then without even realizing it, we're shifting in a way that's also helping the process to move along.
mm,
So I think it's really important for people that are worried about the discomfort to remember that discomfort is a normal part of the process, but it does not mean that you have to suffer through it.
mhm,
And a really simple way to, again, like stay on top of what you're feeling during contractions, it's not foolproof, it's not going to work 100% of the time, but it may help you feel more in control if you're able to rock your body with it.
mhm,
And people go into a contraction, they're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be overwhelming. And they hunch up and they tense their shoulders. And yeah, I mean, there are certain times and certain contractions where you're just like, wow, what the heck is happening? Like, this is way more intense. But I think the thought of moving through it is more challenging than actually just moving through it. So if we start to rock, start to shift, loosen our bodies, then we're actually decreasing tension in other areas of our body. And the rhythmic movement is actually disengaging that big thinking brain that gets in the way. And we have an opportunity now to also help the process move along.
mm,
So that rhythmic movement is so, so key, not only for helping work the baby down and conserving energy, but also for actually helping us to shift out of that place where contractions feel overwhelming and instead get into a place where we feel in control.
I love that. So, I like to tell the families I'm supporting that it's not necessarily about pain or pleasure, but in labor, we are going to experience heightened sensations on either end of the spectrum. Like it wasn't pain free for me, so I can't speak to that, and I don't speak to that. But I acknowledge that there is a place of joy sensationally that can happen, right? So when we're talking
Mhm.
about nipple stimulation or that oxytocin release, whatever, like just spending time with our partners, there is space for pleasure within that, within the labor experience. And I also want you to know that that pleasure is going to bring on the other end of the experience too. So it's like just be open and your breath will bring you through and your movement will bring you through each wave. So I tell them
Yeah.
it's just it's a series of heightened sensations, not necessarily pain or pleasure or pain free, but you're going to experience all of it and you want to open yourself up to the experience of all of it so that it's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's
Yeah.
it.
Oh my gosh. I love that description, heightened sensations. I think that's so much more accurate than calling it like pain or whatever. Like we have this one word pain and we associate pain with like, stubbing your toe, breaking a bone, and then also labor, like
Mhm.
totally different things. Like pain is not the best word to describe labor at all. I
Mm-mm.
love heightened sensations on either end of the spectrum. I feel like that's just so that it just makes so much more sense.
I
That's
love that.
awesome.
So, how
Yeah.
can we get the medical professionals, the midwives, the birthing coaches,
Mhm.
the doulas, to collaborate to create a supportive environment that encourages movement during labor and decreases fear?
Yeah, that's really important. So I love, again, to start bringing these things up prenatally, start having conversations well in advance. A lot of times, especially with hospital-based providers, there's not a whole lot of talk about your quote unquote birth plan until about 36 weeks of pregnancy. And I think that's way too late to start having those conversations. I know, obviously with hospitals, particularly like I'm very familiar with the hospitals in the Philadelphia area, it's large practices and you have a prenatal visit that might not be somebody that you actually ever see again or somebody
Mhm.
that comes to your birth. So when we talk about movement prenatally, we might say things to our providers at a prenatal visit, like, how often do you support people when they're laboring in hands and knees? And then also, how about the other people in your practice? Like, we want to get as much information prenatally as possible. We want to open those doors up to, like, hey, I'm thinking a lot about positioning and movement during labor. And we also want to make sure that we can kind of read how providers are responding to that. Is it something that automatically makes them feel a little defensive, or do we feel like they're very kind of warm and open to that? So we start that conversation prenatally. And then in labor, I think it's really, really helpful to have a support person or even a support team that is very willing to help share your preferences for labor. So that could be a birth partner, it could be a family member, it could be a doula, it could be a combination of those people. And then those people are kind of acting as that go-between so that the person that's laboring doesn't have to get out of that laboring space. They can stay in it, and then their support people can say, hey, we're going to be trying lots of different positions. We want to try XYZ. Or even, what I tell people in my classes, I give them pictures of different laboring positions and I say, bring this with you. Say to the nurse, we want to try this. I think when we, again, like you use the word collaborate, that's the goal. When we work with our providers, when we pull them into our experience and we say, hey, we know you have so much to offer us, and also we want to incorporate this into our experience. How can we do this together? And I think a lot of that in the moment falls on the support team that's in place. The other thing, and this is more of like a tangible tip, the other thing that I think is really effective is to use the props that the hospital or birthplace has to offer. I think that really pulls in the labor and delivery nurse. Like, hey, you have this prop that we want to use for these positions that we want to do. And then the nurse is like, oh yeah, okay, that's something that the nurse is familiar with. And then they're more willing to come in and like help you try out different options with that. So birth props might be something like the birth ball, the peanut ball, the squat bar. And people can Google those things to see what they look like if they're unfamiliar with them. But just kind of being like, hey, you have this prop and we want to use it. Can you help us do that? I think that can really help to like let the nurse or the provider know, like, you have things to offer. We want to do that. We want to work together to make this happen.
I've actually been really impressed. And every time I go into a hospital and I see nurses who are just prepared for the moment, I always think of you. I'm like, they were trained by Brittany. I know.
Oh, thank you.
I'm
Yeah, I mean,
like,
I do.
I
I,
can relax because they're on top of it. I literally always think of you. My last birth this last week was very impressive. They were moving her and they were, and I got to help and support because they're like, Troi, can you help me move through? And of course, I know what's going on, but there's like two other people, support people in the room, and they're
yeah,
like, what's happening? And I'm just like, I'm proud of this nurse. Okay. That's all I have. We are working together because I've had the opposite experience where it's been
yeah.
like, no, stop, wait, what's going on? I don't like
Mhm.
that. This isn't familiar with us. So it's really beautiful to start to see the progress of the community in general. Birth workers are
Mhm.
coming together and understanding holistic forms of care, move,
Yeah,
breathing, temperature changes and how they contribute to comfort
yeah.
levels in labor,
Mhm.
the benefit of support team. There are so many really beautiful things that are taking place in the hospitals that I'm proud of. I want to
Mhm.
contribute it to you, but I also want to contribute it to birth workers like myself,
Oh,
walking
yeah.
with a level of respect for providers and OBs and nurses. Like we have to come in with a collaborative spirit. We are not here to be combative. We're just here to make this experience for our laborer the best it can be. It's a
Absolutely.
proper decision. So
Absolutely.
I love that. I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah.
And it's also a matter of preparation. So we ask the questions to our OBs, we ask the questions to our nurses about what's going on in the hospitals. But more importantly, we have to let our support team around us know what it is that we want. I really
Mhm.
emphasize a lot movement, practice, labor. Let's reinforce this childbirth education. I'm really big
Yeah.
on not doing things that aren't fun. If I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. I'm not doing it. So I'm like, I'm trying to make childbirth education as fun as possible. We're doing movement and labor positions and push parties, like bring your support team so you can go through that way instead of like having your notepad and your pen, writing it all down. Let's reinforce that knowledge through interactive, practical ways of actually applying it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
absolutely live by that method. So with that being said, one of my final questions for you, Brittany, is do you have any favorite ways to labor prep, whether it's Pilates, swimming, yoga, walking, dancing? What does that look like for you?
Oh
And
my gosh.
share that with the world?
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's such a good question. So people ask me this all the time. They're like, "Well, when should I start practicing these labor positions?" And I love that they want to practice, but at the same time I'm like, it's got to be a lifestyle. Like it's not about a to-do list. It's not like, let's check this off. Did we spend 5 minutes in XYZ labor positions today? No, let's think like when we're standing in line at the grocery store, how are we moving our bodies? What's happening in our bodies? How does this feel? How does it feel when we widen our legs and rock with our legs farther apart? How does it feel when we narrow our legs? Or, somebody's watching TV at night. Well, let's sit on the birth ball to watch TV. Let's spend some time in all fours leaning onto the birth ball. Let's incorporate some of these labor positions into our everyday lifestyle so that they become something that we're just familiar with, so that we
Mm,
we literally can birth our babies similarly to how we've lived the last few months of our life. And if someone's listening and they're like, I'm 36 weeks pregnant, I haven't been doing this. Well, it's never too late. You could just start
mhm,
incorporating these things at any point, but it also doesn't have to be something that you wait until 34 weeks to start doing. So all of the things you mentioned, Pilates, swimming, moving, dancing, all of that is amazing. And I think all of that stuff can be easily applied to labor and birth when we just kind of think about it in more of a like intentional way. Like, what's happening in my body right now? How does this feel in my body? I definitely encourage people to spend time sitting on the floor, and not only
mhm,
sitting, but like in all fours. Bring your legs wider apart, bring them closer together. What happens when you get into a lunge when you're also in all fours? Does that feel good to you or not? Because if it doesn't, that's also something to be really important, like to
mhm,
think about. It's an important thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more of like a lifestyle of movement, and it doesn't have to be like exercise movement, just incorporating movement into your life. That being said, I know people do like to have, well, like a tell me what to do sort of thing. So, what I usually tell people is try not to stay in one position for more than 20 minutes at a time.
mhm,
And this is in life, not just in labor. Make sure that you're moving your body. Make sure that, like, if you're sitting at a desk working, you're getting up and you're taking a walk. Maybe replace your desk chair with a birth ball so you can move a little bit more. Spend some time in all fours to feel like what that feels like in your body. That's a really common laboring position.
mhm,
But I do find that, particularly for first time moms that are not spending time with toddlers on the floor, a lot of times they haven't been in all fours. Like it's not a position they're getting into. So spend some time there and see what that feels like. I also tell people, like, spend some time, thinking about, what does it feel like when my knees are far apart versus when I bring them together? What if I rotate my thighs? So if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So what if I do things like this? Like, how does this feel in my body? Or if I go the other way, how does this feel? Do I have more tension or less tension on the other side? So
mhm,
just thinking, like, throughout the day, what's happening in my body as I'm shifting.
mhm,
And then also, anything like swimming, walking, it doesn't have to be an exercise, but all of that's going to be good because mobility is really, really key for maximizing the amount of not only like bony space, but how easily everything shifts in labor and how good you feel afterwards.
mhm,
Because like I said, like we were talking about, your body will give birth, it'll happen, but let's do it in a way that like is as healthy as possible for our bodies with as minimal quote unquote damage as possible so that we can move forward into our postpartums and just heal from birth rather than having to heal from like more than just the process.
yeah, yeah, I love that, and I think that's a really good place to even to end this, even though I wanna talk to you
Mm.
so much more
I
about this.
know, I feel like we could spend the next 3 hours just chatting.
So tell the people how they can find you, tap into you,
Mhm.
whatever it is that you provide to the world. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I have a pretty active social media presence on Instagram, particularly, and TikTok as well. So you can find me there at Blossoming Belly's Birth. That's Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook too. I post a whole lot of like videos, just little snippets of like how to incorporate movement here or there, pregnancy-related movement, things like that, and then also other things about just childbirth education or advocacy or communication, all that stuff. So they can find me at Blossoming Belly's Birth on social media. Also, my website is blossomingbellysbirth.com. All my classes and everything that I offer, including a whole bunch of free resources, are all listed on my website. So I have like a bunch of webinars, many of which are free. And I think that it's really important for people to be able to tap into this knowledge and information, no matter, what their financial status is, because a lot of times this stuff can kind of seem like, oh, well, this is a privileged thing, and it shouldn't be like that. Everybody should have access to information to have an empowering birth. So there's a ton of free stuff on my website. And then what else? I have a little giveaway for everybody that's here. Um, so I guess we can probably post the link to where they can get this. But the 543 note cards that I have, I would love to give to everybody. So the 543 quote unquote rule is the guideline that I created for movement in labor. And it's just a way to incorporate pretty much everything we've been talking about into a guide that's really easy for support people, particularly to follow. So those are 543 rule note cards. So there'll be a link down there for them. And then the code that you can use to get them for free is nurture your pregnancy. But we can put all of that, I guess, below the, the video. So
I
yeah,
love that. Oh, we appreciate you so much. I appreciate you so much, Brittany.
thank you. I
It has been a
appreciate you, and
pleasure.
I'm so excited that you did this. I feel like this is just so needed, and it was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, everybody. My
Yeah,
name is Troi Lauren of Mama Tree Doula. I am your favorite full spectrum wellness doula. Let's give it up for Brittany Sharpe
thank you.
McCollum. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you around. Continue
Thank you so
your
much.
pregnancy journey, everyone. Happy healing, happy baking. Beautiful soul, that's a wrap for today. Look at you taking time out of your busy schedule for self care. If you enjoyed today's episode, do me a favor follow the podcast and write a review. Following and sharing is the best way to ensure that mamas just like you learn how to nurture their pregnancy journey. It also lets me know if you are enjoying this. So before you go, follow and share your thoughts, all right? I will catch you on the next episode. Happy baking and happy healing.